Breaking tonight, weeks after leaked reports accusing Russia of meddling in the 2016 elections, the U.S. intelligence community is finally ready to reveal its findings, allegedly detailing the Kremlin's dirty tricks. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. This news breaking just a short time ago. As early as tomorrow, President Obama will receive the report. Then it goes to President-elect Donald Trump. Mr. Trump is calling on the intelligence experts to prove the allegations that Russia hacked the Democrats' computer systems. Then today, Mr. Trump went a step further, appearing to side with WikiLeaks chief Julian Assange, who claims that Russia did not give him the hacked material. The president-elect tweeting, "Julian Assange said Russians did not give him the info!" Exclamation point. He's referring to Sean Hannity's interview with Julian Assange. That set off some Republican members of Congress, Republicans I say, who said that Assange is not a man to be trusted.
I have a lot more faith in our intelligence officers serving around the world, the very smart and experienced analysts that we have here in the nation's capital than I do in people like Julian Assange. I can tell you that much.
I think the guy is a sycophant for Russia. He leaks, he steals data, and compromises national security.
Today on Capitol Hill, Vice President-elect Mike Pence coming to Mr. Trump's defense and even taking his own swipe at the intelligence experts.
I think that the President-elect has expressed his very sincere and healthy American skepticism about intelligence conclusions. Given some of the intelligence failures of recent years, the President-elect's made it clear to the American people that he's skeptical about conclusions from the bureaucracy, and I think the American people hear him loud and clear.
Joining us to weigh in on all of this, former White House Press Secretary Dana Perino and Bill Bennett, who has advised President-elect Donald Trump. But first, to our Chief Intelligence Correspondent, Catherine Herridge, on this new intelligence report. Catherine?
Megyn, tonight we're confirming new information about the intelligence report that investigates foreign meddling in American elections going back to 2008. The report is more than 50 pages in length, and there are two versions: a classified report for Mr. Obama, who gets the findings first, and an unclassified version that should be public early next week. In a PBS interview, the CIA director is not waiting until tomorrow to make his case.
Do you think the motive of the Russians was to help Donald Trump?
Again, that's one of the things that will be addressed inside of the report. I'm not going to address that in advance of its release.
In the Fox News interview, Julian Assange, the head of WikiLeaks, said his source for the DNC and Clinton campaign emails was not the Russian government. And Assange claimed the theft of Clinton campaign manager John Podesta's emails was really child's play, which did not require the skill of a foreign intelligence service.
Podesta gave out that his password was the word password. His own staff said, "This email that you've received, this is totally legitimate." So this is something a 14-year-old kid could have hacked.
The new Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer told MSNBC that Mr. Trump is, quote, really dumb taking on the intelligence community and its conclusions because spies have so many clever ways to get back at you, Megyn.
That's food for thought. Catherine, great to see you.
It is. You're welcome.
Joining me now, Dana Perino, a former White House press secretary for President George W. Bush and co-host of The Five. Good to see you.
Thank you.
That's a scary thought, but it's true. Who wants to mess with a spy? Let's just draw a distinction, because I think most Americans think well of our intelligence agencies and say, wait a minute, why would Donald Trump be picking a fight with them? But it's not all, men and women, assets, boots on the ground. There are some political people at the organization who might be saying things with which Donald Trump could take legitimate issue here.
Well, I think it is with blessed relief that the intelligence community is going to brief the president and then the president-elect, and then some sort of document becomes public to all of us next week, because this has gone on for about 5 weeks.
Right.
And
since the election.
Some evidence, some proof, some conclusion. I actually think it would be interesting for the president and the president-elect to get the briefing together, so that everybody hears the same words in the same meeting and come out of it. I think it's extremely unfortunate to have a situation where you have a president-elect at odds with the intelligence community, I think almost unnecessarily so, heading into the inauguration, which is just 15 days away.
But Trump is irritated that they're assigning motives, right? I mean, he seems to be Yes, he's disputing that it was the Russians based on Julian Assange's comments. But he also doesn't like that he feels they got ahead of their skis and said, and they did it to help Donald Trump, because he feels it delegitimizes his election.
And I think that he is right to have that concern. And you did hear that there were political people, political appointees that were on their way out the door that pushed this narrative. And I do think that Democrats are trying to calm themselves and wrap themselves in this cocoon of we lost the election because of Podesta's emails.
Right.
And Assange, who I don't trust at all, he's right when he says that Podesta had no security.
OMG. If your password is password, change it right now. Go right now. In the commercial break, you change it.
And don't change it to password 1234.
And don't change it to QWERTY.
Yeah, that one won't work either. So everybody has a little bit of truth in this. And the other thing, there's a report out today that Donald Trump's administration will change the director of National Intelligence Office. Yep. Now, I think that those changes were long in the works and probably really good because the office had good intentions, hasn't worked out that well in practice.
And Donald Trump's being advised by Michael Flynn, who knows this whole thing.
He knows the whole thing.
He knows that there's a lot of bureaucracy that may not be necessary and maybe more, there to sort of assuage politicians than protect Americans.
And Democrats are will then connect, they'll say, well, Donald Trump's mad about the Russia issue, so therefore he's going to change and punish the intelligence community by changing the DNA. I don't think that is the case. So everything is getting a little bit too muddled. It's bewildering for Americans, and yes, the intelligence community deserves support. And I think some of the changes that they're planning to make at the DNI are good ones for the community.
Okay, but let's talk about the actual thing that Donald Trump is saying, which is he's accepting carte blanche that the Russians didn't hack the DNC. And we don't know that.
No, we don't.
We don't know that.
You know who else doesn't know that? Who? Assange doesn't know that.
Well, yeah, let me just say, this is an interesting exchange he had with Hannity. Hannity asked him, 100% you did not get it from Russia. Yes, he says, correct. And then Hannity says, or anybody associated with Russia. And Assange says, we can say, and we have said repeatedly, that our source is not the Russian government. It is not a state party. So he would not go as far as to say anybody associated with Russia. That's where the hair is split. That tells you something. And
he may not know.
Okay, so it wasn't Vladimir Putin, but
it was Dmitry.
He's not dumb enough to do it himself or to have one of his top lieutenants do it. Right. We don't really have any answers yet. So as you point out, Friday is just a few days away.
We'll get the briefing.
Does Donald Trump accept it, do you think, if the intel agencies there say, I'm sorry to tell you this, sir, but it was Russia?
I think he may accept it, but I think he's also right to continue to say to the Democrats that this notion that Russia, with funny business and interfering, that was the thing that helped get Donald Trump elected.
Yeah.
That's where we have to draw the line. That logic doesn't actually flow for me. I don't see it there, and I think he's right to push back on that.
And John Brennan says that's going to be addressed in this report that we're all going to see.
I hope it's definitive.
The motive. Dana, great to see you.
Thank you.
Joining us now with more, Bill Bennett, Fox News contributor, former education secretary, and chairman of the Conservative Leaders for Education. Bill, great to see you. So let's start with that.
Thank you.
The Democrats believe, not all of them, but the belief that some are pushing is that Putin wanted Trump elected because he thought he'd be a pushover. He thinks he's friendly towards Putin because Putin flatters him, and Donald Trump responds well to flattery. Do you buy that?
Yeah, that's the unstated premise. Good for you, Megyn. This is the notion that the Democrats want to push. And you could hear that in a month or 2 or 3 months, well, Trump's the president, but that's because the Russians got him in there. If you think about it, step back. First of all, we have no evidence that any vote was changed because of any Russian interference. And I believe the Russians were trying to hack in.
So you don't believe necessarily Julian Assange when he says, no, it wasn't Russia?
I don't believe the Russians. I don't believe Julian Assange. I'd call that, what we say in philosophy, insufficient options. And Julian Assange says it wasn't the Russian government. Good distinction you made. It could have been someone who said, I'm not the Russian government. I mean, how does he know? It's very complicated. Thank goodness we're going to get resolution of this. But back to the larger question, why all this fuss? Because I think the Democrats want to suggest this election was somehow illegitimate because the Russians wanted Trump to win. But if you step back and think about it, why would the Russians want Trump to win? He has promised to rebuild the military and the strategic arsenal. He has promised energy independence, both very bad things for the Russians. Second point, when have the Russians thrived? In the last 5 or 6 years, have they gotten weaker or stronger? Obama and Clinton have been very good for Russian power. Trump will not be good for Russian power. So I think the basic premise undercuts the notion here that the liberals or Democrats are trying to
Okay,
push.
but in the Democrats' defense, if the Russians messed with our election by, hacking Podesta, hacking the DNC, just for kicks, right? Let's say it wasn't to help Donald Trump, but it was just to mess with us. That is a huge deal, right? I mean, we do need to know who did it. There do need to be consequences to it. And can we have our president rejecting the assessment of the 17 intel agencies if they say,
no,
I know you love Vladimir Putin, or you want to get along with him, but he did something bad that you're going to have to deal with?
Right. I don't think he's rejected. He hasn't rejected outright. He has raised questions. He said it could be the Russians, could be Chinese, could be a 400 guy.
But he keeps retweeting. He said he's talking about Assange says it wasn't the Russians. I mean, he certainly sounds like he is a believer.
I know, but we'll find out in a day or two. Look, to have some skepticism about the intelligence community is okay. I had briefings from the intelligence community when I was drug czar. Some of them were right, some of them weren't. Dana pointed out that you may have some political appointees trying to influence. Remember Devin Nunes, Megyn? He was trying to have a hearing to get all the intelligence agencies to deliver what it is they had, and they canceled the hearing. They weren't ready yet. Thank goodness in 48 hours we may get to the final truth of this. Sunlight's the best disinfectant, Justice Brandeis said. Let's see it all, and then we'll know. I like the idea of the two of them getting briefed together. That would be an interesting notion.
Can you imagine how awkward that would be? Like, if they spoke over each other? Like, the poor intel briefers, like, Anyway, great to see you, Bill.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thanks, man.
Breaking tonight, 4 people are under arrest after a truly ugly video surfaces out of Chicago. A young man tied up, his mouth taped shut. We've blurred it in part here. He is kicked, beaten, and threatened with a knife by a group of people shouting F Trump and F white people.
What? Donald Trump, white people, what?
What's worse is the police say the man being beaten is mentally disabled. We're gathering more information right now. The police have just spoken out about this publicly. We'll tell you what they've said shortly. Plus, President Obama and Republican leaders went head-to-head on Capitol Hill today in a new war over Obamacare. It was a very interesting day on Capitol Hill. And this one affects millions of patients, this next battle, millions of taxpayers, and everyone who basically goes to the doctor. 2 of America's top experts on this are next on what is likely to happen here. And then new fighting about the folks being discussed for the U.S. Supreme Court. Judge Andrew Napolitano was just ahead on what's behind the controversy.
To not confirm a Supreme Court nominee at all. I think that's something the American people simply will not tolerate, and we'll be looking forward to receiving a Supreme Court nomination and moving forward on it.
Developing tonight, new fallout after President Obama and Republican leaders went head-to-head on Capitol Hill today over the fate of Obamacare. President Obama speaking to congressional Democrats behind closed doors this afternoon, imploring them not to, quote, rescue Republicans by helping the effort to replace the law. At the same time, Vice President-elect Mike Pence was promising GOP members that repealing the law and then replacing it with a better system will be the new administration's first order of business. So what does all of this mean for Obamacare's future and for you? Trace Gallagher has that report live in our West Coast newsroom. Trace?
Megyn, any doubts about Obamacare being the battle of the year were erased today as leaders of both parties tugged on the rope. In an effort to save his signature law, President Obama went to Capitol Hill to fire up his team. But the president knows full well his party does not have the votes to block Republicans. So instead, he's advising Democratic lawmakers not to rescue them by helping to pass replacement measures. Mr. Obama is also recommending that any changes to the law should now be labeled Trump Care. And some Democratic lawmakers have adopted a spin on Trump's Make America Great Again slogan by pushing the phrase, Make America Sick Again. Watch.
Republicans will soon learn that you can't keep the good parts of the ACA and remove the rest of the law and still have it work.
The Republicans say they're planning on doing just that. Today, GOP lawmakers also huddled on Capitol Hill to lay out plans to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, with Vice President-elect Mike Pence vowing that Donald Trump is a man of his word. Listen.
Today, our message is very simple. Working with the leadership here in the House and in the Senate, we're going to be in the promise-keeping business.
And the president-elect weighed in on Twitter, reminding his party to not let Democrats off the hook for Obamacare, saying, quote, Republicans must be careful in that the Dems own the failed Obamacare disaster with its poor coverage and massive premium increases. Top Republicans like House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator Rand Paul are also warning their colleagues not to pull the rug out on people. In other words, before you repeal, make sure you can replace. Megyn.
Trace, thank you. Well, Republicans may be vowing to repeal Obamacare, but with no replacement lined up, what would happen next? Avik Roy is the Forbes opinion editor and president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, and Austin Goolsbee is President Obama's former chief economist. Great to see you both. So that would be a pickle, right? I mean, Avik, you are the person I think knows the most about this stuff, with all due respect to Austin. But we've been talking to you about Obamacare since I don't know when, since Obama was like a baby. and you tell me, if they manage to repeal and they are not able to replace, what happens?
Well, Megyn, there's one word in this whole Obamacare fight that matters more than any other, and that's the filibuster. I've done something really special tonight, Megyn. I've stolen Karl Rove's whiteboard. I got it right here.
Oh, this is good. We like props.
Here's something that we're going to show you. That the thing that Obamacare did and had in 2009, 2010, when Democrats controlled the Senate, they had 60 votes to pass the key parts of Obamacare. Republicans this time around only have 52 votes. And that means, yes, they can defund Obamacare. They can take some of the funding away from Obamacare. But the thing that you and I have talked about so many times on the show, Megyn, is how the regulations in Obamacare are driving up the premiums. And if you don't reform the regulations, you can't really repeal and replace Obamacare in full. So how are Republicans going to get to 60 votes that they need to impose or institute their own reforms of the health care system? That's going to be a challenge. And what I've argued is that the way to do it is to give Democrats something they want. Cover as many people as possible, but do it in a consumer-driven way in which people have actual choice as to the kind of insurance plans they can buy.
So you heard it there, Austin. They need Democrat buy-in if they want to do it right. And if they don't do it right, we're back to Trump's warning, which is be careful, because right now this is hanging around the necks of Democrats to the extent Obamacare is not working, and it could soon be a Republican problem.
Oh, it is a Republican problem. Are you kidding? Look, Megyn, we talked about this throughout the campaign, that Donald Trump was proposing things that he contradicted himself. He wanted to keep parts of the law. He wanted to say get rid of the whole law. And experts from both sides kept saying, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense for him to do what he's saying would blow the system up. And now he's actually going to be the president, and they're trying to sort it out, and they're not going to be able to. The problem that Obama had is when you do anything in the healthcare system, you then own everyone's problems, everything everyone hates about the healthcare system.
Everything that's ever happened in the healthcare system, it's on you.
All that stuff they attribute to Obamacare, even things that had nothing to do with Obamacare. And now the Republicans are about to do the reverse. If they get rid of Obamacare, if they fundamentally alter it, anybody's complaint about the healthcare system will be transformed into, well, what did you think was going to happen when you destroyed Obamacare?
And yet they have to do something, Avik. They have to do something. Trump ran on a promise that he would. These Republicans are from districts that want it repealed and replaced. And there is a real question about whether Senator Schumer is right. You can't take away, you can't still have the good stuff, the universal coverage or, near, whatever, the coverage of pre-existing conditions without, he didn't say it, but without the bad stuff, the mandate.
Yeah. And this is where Democrats, in my view, are totally wrong. At my think tank, the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, you can go to our website, freeop.org. We published a plan called Transcending Obamacare that does everything that Democrats claim to support. It covers more people, 12 million more people than Obamacare, but at 20% lower premiums, with much more choice, much more access. It can be done. This idea that Obamacare is the only way to make sure that people have access to health insurance coverage is not true. If you give people the choice, if you give Americans control again of their own health care dollars, they'll be able to choose the plans that are right for them at much lower costs than Obamacare does. So I don't think it's an either-or choice.
All right. Well, I think it's interesting. Donald Trump interviewed and sat down with Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, who he really knows a lot about Obamacare. So he's the architect. And listen to him. He's got a lot of thoughts on how you could potentially keep the good stuff while, while getting rid of the mandate, although he doesn't love that idea. Great to see you both.
Thank you, Megyn.
Great to see you, Megyn.
So it could turn into the biggest fight of President Trump's first term. And Judge Napolitano is next on why the new controversy exists now over filling a Supreme Court seat. Wait until you hear the reversal that the Democrats have done on this. And then Karl Rove and Mo Eliki will join us with the debate over which way this Supreme Court appointment is likely to go. Plus, Mr. Trump may have fired her from The Apprentice, but he just hired her at the White House. Tonight, Omarosa is here for her first interview since being tapped to work in the West Wing.
.24/7, Channel 115. From the world headquarters of Fox News, it's the Kelly File with Megyn Kelly.
Well, one of the earliest decisions from President-elect Donald Trump will be, when he becomes president, the selection of a Supreme Court justice to fill the vacancy created by Antonin Scalia's death last February. While Mr. Trump's final pick has yet to be announced, the issue is already creating controversy, and Shannon Bream is reporting from Washington on why. Shannon?
Whoever gets the nod from the president-elect would expect criticism from the left, but there are growing concerns from some on the right. A coalition of pro-life groups and leaders has sent a letter saying they're worried about some of the candidates on the list of 21 potential picks Mr. Trump has released. Quote, "We urge you not to consider candidates lacking a
All that information is being taken into consideration very, very carefully.
First Liberty Institute, a group that takes on religious freedom legal fights, has been pouring through all the opinions of the judges on Mr. Trump's list and says there is a way to calm conservative fears.
There are many other excellent judges on the list that have no red flags and, in fact, a very solid judicial background that would make excellent choices at the U.S. Supreme Court.
It will take 60 votes in the Senate to get any Supreme Court nominee past the first procedural hurdle. So, unless something changes, Republicans will need some help from across the aisle.
Wants a person most like Justice Scalia, not necessarily in terms of temperament and personality.
Too bad, because he was fun to read and listen.
Yes, he was. But in terms of the idea that the meaning of the Constitution was fixed at the time it was ratified, a theory generally called originalism. Now, this is not just something in the weeds. It profoundly affects how judges rule. Justice Ginsburg, for example, believes the Constitution changes to adapt to political needs.
It's a living, breathing document.
Correct. President-elect Trump rejects that and takes the Scalia view that if the Constitution is going to change, the states are going to have to ratify amendments because that's the only way it can change.
That's what Justice Scalia used to say from the bench. He used to say, you want to say that there's a constitutional right to an abortion or to, have certain kinds of relations and so on.
Right.
Why do you want 9 guys or gals in robes up here to make that decision? You go get the American people to pass an amendment, make it clear that's a constitutional right.
So he is looking for a person who generally accepts that view of judging from the Supreme Court.
Now, in your view, will the Democrats ever vote to confirm another originalist?
No. And the reason I can say that is because they said so today. Senator Schumer on another network said the unthinkable. After ripping into the Republicans for their refusal to hold hearings on Merrick Garland, a perfectly qualified judge, but somebody nominated in the lame duck part of President Obama's presidency. He has suggested that the Democrats might engage in enough parliamentary tricks to prevent President-elect, it will be President at the time, President Trump's nominee from even being voted upon in the Senate until the 2018 congressional elections when the Democrats think they will control the Senate.
And that's, we're going to talk about his flip-flop, his incredible obvious flip-flop in a minute. But what would that do to the Supreme Court if they were stuck with 8 justices for the next couple of years?
Well, a tie vote in the Supreme Court, which doesn't always happen, but has happened since Justice Scalia's death, means that the decision below becomes the law. It's not a ruling on the merits. It's just a refusal to disturb that decision below. But I can tell you that the Supreme Court does want a 9th member, no matter who it is, because they feel they have more integrity when they have a full membership.
Justice
and President
Scalia,
Trump believes that.
When he was confirmed in the 80s, right?
Yes.
It's still a partisan nation. It's still divided government. It was confirmed, I think it was 98 to 0. He didn't,
Correct.
He didn't have anybody vote against him. It was just 2 people were missing.
Correct.
90.
It does not.
It wasn't that there were fewer liberals or Democrats.
It was a different time and there was more civility. It does not appear that, no matter who it is, that will happen this time.
Great to see you, Judge.
Likewise.
Well, as the judge just mentioned, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is already threatening to keep the seat vacant for the duration of Mr. Trump's presidency. I'm sure he always felt this way. You just have to stand up. Well, wait. It's a dramatic turn, actually, from the position taken by the New York senator just last year, when it was a Democratic president choosing the nominee.
Here, he doesn't even know who the president's going to propose, and he says, no, we're not having hearings, we're not going to go forward. To leave the Supreme Court vacant for 300 days in a divided time, this kind of obstructionism isn't going to last. And, you know, we Democrats didn't do this. It's hard for me to imagine a nominee that Donald Trump would choose that would get Republican support that we could support. So you're right.
And so you would do your best to hold the seat open?
Absolutely.
And they wonder why their approval ratings are so very low. Joining me now, Karl Rove, former Deputy Chief of Staff under President George W. Bush and a Fox News political contributor, and Mo Alithi, founding director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. Let me start with you on this one, Mo, as the Democrat. I mean, that's my question. My question to you.
You got to love Congress. Look, both sides have gone back and forth on this, and both sides have. I mean, I listened to Mitch McConnell's response to that today, and he sounded like Chuck Schumer did back then, right? Yep. You know, I think there is one important distinction here, and I'm going to come around and knock my party a little bit in a second, but I think there is one important distinction between this and what the Republicans did with the Garland nomination. They said, we are not going to even entertain or listen to a hearing on anybody that President Obama nominates. They said he shouldn't even make a nomination. That's not what Chuck Schumer is saying. Chuck Schumer is saying, we don't want someone who's going to be outside the mainstream. He's not saying we won't hold a hearing. He's saying we probably won't vote for anyone unless it's someone in the mainstream. It sounds to me more like a leveraging tool here. Having said that, they do run the risk of sounding like obstructionists. And nobody sounds good, whether it's Democrat or Republican, when they sound like obstructionists. I would hope that Democrats say more along the lines of, this is what we want to see. No different than when Republicans say, we won't support a candidate who is pro-choice. Democrats say, we're not going to accept someone who's outside the mainstream.
You know what, Karl? The Republicans say things like that. That's true. But we have a Justice Elena Kagan and a Justice Sonia Sotomayor sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court, nominated by President Obama, a Democrat, because the Republicans did get through. They were not stopped. Right. And the question is how, I understand that this has gotten politicized after Robert Bork. And you get borked, and you get bounced out of there if you're considered too partisan. But it didn't used to be this way. And whether there's ever going to be a point where we do what was intended, which is you look at these nominees and you decide whether they're qualified as a U.S. senator, and you don't try to trump the will of the president who was duly elected by the American people.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for inviting Avik Roy on earlier for using my whiteboard. He introduced me to Mr. Andrew Jackson in return, so I really appreciated that.
Oh, you did get money for that.
Oh, boy.
What a scam.
My whiteboard, you think I'm going to let him use it free? I'm a free marketeer, and so is he.
Ever
so
the capitalist. Ever
exactly.
The
I had no idea it
now,
could be rented.
Now, look, let's put this in a little bit of perspective. Look, for 80 years, no president in their last year has been able to nominate and see confirmed a nominee to the Supreme Court, Democrat or Republican. And this has been around for a long time. Joe Biden in June of 1992 said, oh, we shouldn't, if President Bush, George H.W. Bush nominates anybody, we shouldn't even consider them until after the November elections, which really meant you're never going to approve them because you have basically 6 weeks in order to name somebody, do the background, hand over all the material, have the hearings and vote on it. That has never happened. So, at least in the modern era. Chuck Schumer raised this a little bit earlier. In July of 2007, he said if Bush nominates anybody in the last 18 months, we're not going to change. We're not going to take him up, and we shouldn't confirm him.
And he said we should reverse the presumption of confirmation. We should make them prove that they're in the mainstream rather than us having to prove that they're not.
Exactly right. And now he changed for last year for political reasons. And now, look, I write this off largely to play into the cameras and playing to the base and trying to demonstrate that he's going to be a strong and effective leader for the left wing of the Democratic Party. But his problem is that in 2018, he's got a lot of Democrats up in states like Montana and North Dakota and Missouri and Indiana and Ohio and West Virginia who are not going to be inclined to march off into San Francisco Bay or live in a tent in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so as a result, I think it's going to be very hard for him to keep up.
I'll give you the final word, Mo. Go ahead.
Look, we just heard a report from Shannon Bream who said that there's conservatives out there saying that they don't want to entertain a Republican or a nominee who is who's not pro-life, who's pro-choice. I think it is fair for senators to go in there and say these are the benchmarks by which I will or will not support a nominee, but put them up for a vote. Let the Senate then have the hearing. Let the Senate then have the vote. Use whatever benchmark you want to decide what your vote's going to be, but have the vote. And that's where I think the Republicans had the bigger problem with the Garland thing than this.
I'll just give you one stat. Sonia Sotomayor confirmed by the Senate 68 to 31. 68 to 31. And you know that means she had some bipartisan support. This is how it's going in a direction that I would submit to you as somebody who practiced law for 10 years was never intended. Good to see you both. Breaking tonight, we're getting new details on a truly horrifying attack in Chicago, filmed and broadcast on Facebook.
What? Donald Trump, white people, what?
4 people now under arrest, and David Wohl and Richard Fowler are next, and why this could become a federal case. Breaking tonight, 4 people now in custody following a disturbing video posted to Facebook Live that showed a man being held hostage and apparently tortured in Chicago. We warn you, it is disturbing.
Donald Trump, white people, what?
No. Goof.
Yeah.
My sister been with you.
Oh,
man. My sister said this not funny, y'all.
In moments, we'll be joined by David Wohl and Richard Fowler with reaction. But first, we check in with Trace Gallagher, who has the new details on the breaking news. Trace?
Megyn, police believe the victim, who is mentally disabled, met a man that he knew and some others in a Chicago suburb, and that they drove him in a stolen car to the west side of Chicago, took him to a home, tied him up, taped his mouth, and began torturing him for between 24 and 48 hours. At least 30 minutes of the torture was streamed live on Facebook, and the woman who was taping acknowledges that she knows it is streaming live. During the video, which, as you say, is very hard to watch, they cut the man's clothing, saying they're going to get him naked and ask him to kiss the floor. Then they kick him, punch him, cut his scalp, and laugh about how much he's bleeding. Throughout the video, you can hear the 4 suspects go after Donald Trump and white people. Watch again.
Donald Trump, white people, what?
No. Goof.
Yeah.
My sister been with you. Oh, man. My sister said this not funny, y'all.
Later, they asked the victim to say how much he loves black people. Police are now investigating this as a possible hate crime and a possible kidnapping. They also say it could be a case of young people making stupid decisions. Here's Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson.
It's sickening. It's sickening. You know, it makes you wonder what would make individuals treat somebody like that. You know, so I've been a cop for 28 years, and I've seen things that you shouldn't see in a lifetime, but it still amazes me how you still see things that you just shouldn't.
Officers found the victim distressed and wandering the streets of West Chicago. They say he's out of the hospital and is being interviewed by detectives, but is having a very difficult time communicating. The 4 suspects, including at least 2 females, are all 18 years old. They remain in custody. Megyn.
Trace, thank you. Joining me now, David Wohl, who's an attorney and a Donald Trump supporter, and Richard Fowler, who's a nationally syndicated radio host and a Fox News contributor. Deeply disturbing, mentally challenged young man tortured for a day? First of all, what kind of crimes are we looking at here, David, and do they include a hate crime, increase because of the
underlying
the racial undertones and the language we heard?
Yeah, the underlying crimes, Megyn, are kidnapping, torture, assault with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, and probably several others. Now, what I found a little bit disturbing is the cops in a press conference said they're not quite sure if this was a hate crime. It's being investigated, and that's after viewing this video. Now, Megyn, rest assured, if the races were reversed and they said that, they'd be fired the next day. I think Richard would agree with that. So what's going to happen here is that they only prosecute it regarding the state crimes, and they leave the hate crime enhancement out. Don't forget who's going to be the Attorney General of the United States in a couple months, Jeff Sessions. I guarantee you he takes this very seriously. This could easily turn into a federal civil rights prosecution, along with several other piggybacking federal crimes, and the hate crime would definitely be included. So they need to take this very seriously. They can't allow political correctness to dictate the prosecution here.
I don't know, Richard. That's obviously a legal call. I know you're not here to play the role of legal analyst, but what do you make? A hate crime is you get an aggravation when somebody's committing the crime based on race, and in that tape we hear them say F white people.
No, I think this is a hate crime. I don't care what race you are, and that's why we have hate crimes in this law, and folks like Joe Biden have worked night and day to keep those laws. And I think, so politics aside here, this video is disgusting, and I think we as a nation have really got to sit down, black, white, yellow, blue, orange, purple, and have a conversation about how we really come together. How we come together, Christians and Muslims and Jews, and all have this larger conversation about we're all American at the end of the day, and this is sickening.
But let me ask you something about that, because does this one act, this disgusting, awful, criminal act, is it any sort of a larger statement on who we are as a people, or are these just thugs? And not young people making stupid decisions, as we know, thugs who are torturing a man. But does it say something about us as Americans?
Well, here's the thing. I think what we can read, what this election shows us, whether you're Democrats or Republican, our nation is pretty much equally divided. Some people sit on one side, other people sit on the other, and it's really time for us to come together and really have a conversation about how we work together to keep America being the great country that it is. We've only thrived when we work together. Some of our best moments are when we work together. When we passed the Voting Rights Act in '65.
But you tell me, David, whether you think that people who are so depraved that they would do this to another human being, one who is mentally challenged no less, can be reached by an effort at the federal or any other level for us to come together?
Well, Megyn, I think you're right about that. And the other thing is, they think somehow that sort of invoking Trump is sort of their ticket to doing this, because everybody hates Trump. They see celebrities hating on Trump, and so they put his name in there, and somehow that fuels or that gives them justification. But I will say this. It's another social media problem, Megyn. We see social media propelling this kind of thing. They think it's cool if it's on social media. They get their 15 minutes of fame. But the good thing is that somebody saw it on social media and apparently reported it. So to that extent, it turned out well.
Well, I beg to differ on that. I think if it wasn't on social media, then we wouldn't be talking about it tonight.
I know, that's right, because
Agreed.
The video is so shocking that it requires attention, and it became national news in an instant. Not an uplifting note to end the segment on, but an important story, guys. No. Thank you.
Thank you, Megyn.
Well, Mr. Trump may have fired her from The Apprentice, but he just hired her at the White House. And tonight, Omarosa is here for her first interview since being tapped to work in the West Wing. Next.